Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on whatever time you're listening. I'm Simon Geere and welcome to Talk HR UK. This is a podcast where I speak to fantastic HR professionals. And when I'm not doing that, I like to help HR directors, managing directors and CEOs source the best HR talent in the southeast of the UK. Now today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sally Desborough. Good afternoon, Sally.
Hello.
Hi, Sally. I've known Sally some time. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We helped Sally find a role within financial services quite a few years ago. Sally's background is very much as an HR generalist through a number of well-known HR professional services organisations. As a member of RSM, Fidelity. Who am I missing? Anyone else?
Before that, it was engineering, manufacturing, so a completely different world.
Exactly. So very nice broad background, and then more recently, Sally's made a real interesting career switch, actually, post-Fidelity, where you've become a mental health first aid instructor, consultant, and speaker. And it's been fantastic to watch your progress. You're quite prolific on LinkedIn. It's good to see a lot of the events and a lot of the hard work you've been doing in that space. And that's really what we wanted to talk to you about today. So I guess that's a great place to start. Tell us about this. Tell us about your mental health work. You know, what led you to this path? You know, how did you get there, and where's it leading you?
Sure, thank you. So I have to say, it wasn't necessarily in my plan. You know, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have told you that I'd be doing what I do now. But I suppose how did I follow this path? Essentially, it's my own experience of mental illness. If I'm being completely honest with you, that's really where my interest stemmed from. In the world of HR, in my generalist roles, I was having numerous conversations with people in the workplace too about mental health issues and supporting people through difficult times, and coaching line managers as well. That was a big part of some of my roles. But also my own experience in 2016 of severe depression. When I was diagnosed with that, it was probably the most difficult time of my life. And I guess through that recovery process, I had some amazing supportive conversations, you know, with my line manager and close colleagues, and then with others, some damaging, not so nice conversations, shall we say, that really almost felt like it cut me up inside. So it was that experience that really led me to wanting to do more about raising awareness about mental health issues, that actually anybody could experience it, and I never imagined that would be me, and encouraging the conversations around it. And so that was, you know, 2016, most of 2016, when I was unwell. And I came out the other side of that really wanting to try and move forward in that space, but not really knowing how. And I kind of left that organisation, joined my new organisation, and was really quite open about my experience. And they approached me to become a mental health first aid training instructor. So really, I kind of jumped at the chance, because I thought that was a way that I could start raising that awareness and doing that knowledge piece. So I was really, really delighted and really excited to do that. So in 2017, I became qualified. I was delivering courses on the side of my full-time HR roles. And at the end of last year, end of 2019, I decided to leave the corporate HR world to focus solely on raising awareness and doing all things mental health related. So the Mental Health First Aid England training programs, but also writing bespoke workshops around mental health awareness, workshops for employees, for line managers, stress management, resilience, self-care, and all those kind of things that are related. And so that's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing since the 1st of January this year, is really trying to drive forward with that onto my own business.
So really, it's a great story, and as you say, it's quite a powerful message to hear that you've taken your own very difficult circumstances and made that very brave step to focus on that as a profession going forward. And I'm pleased to see it going so well, Sally. Genuinely, like I say, it was really easy to approach you and say, hey, you're clearly a leading light in this space now within the HR community. So thanks for being very honest with us today. So, I mean, moving forward, obviously I imagine you've been very busy this year, and we were just talking about this before we started recording. I mean, 2020 will forever be remembered from very many different things to many different people, but mental health is very, very high on the agenda. I mean, it's hugely increased the focus for many HR professionals and their organisations. I mean, why do you think that is, and what should HR be doing now to address this going forward?
Yeah, so I think 2020 has been a funny year, a challenging year for a lot of people. And I think it's fair to say that we always live through change and uncertainty. That is the reality. But I think even more so this year, that's just been intensified a whole hell of a lot. We are living through an unknown time. It's a completely new experience for everyone in our generation, at least anyway. And of course, that's impacted everybody globally in many different ways. In March, in the UK, that lockdown was announced and everyone had to react very quickly. There was very little choice in, okay, you're now working from home, here's some technology, and that's now your reality. And that was very difficult, with very little notice for some people and having to get their heads around that. And then of course there's been this whole new concept of furlough as well. And naturally, all this uncertainty is going to cause anxiety in people. People have been put on furlough. Well, what does this mean longer term for my role? If they're identifying that actually they don't need my role now, what does that mean for the longer term? So that will cause anxiety. And that in turn will impact people's ability to engage with work, to be able to engage with others. And of course, that's going to impact how organisations perform too. So, yeah, people's well-being has ultimately declined in some ways, but other people have also thrived. I mean, let's face it, some businesses have never been better. Some people have actually found working remotely fantastic for their productivity. So everybody's different, everyone's reacted in different ways. I think from an HR perspective, there's been a huge amount of trying to engage with employees and understand where people are at and how they are finding things, and again really trying to understand people's circumstances, because again everyone's living in different circumstances, either alone or in really busy households. And initially, with lockdown 1, shall we say, trying to juggle working remotely, looking after your children, homeschool, you might have a partner who's also trying to work remotely, presents lots of challenges. So there's been a key need to understand people's circumstances and allow for flexibility depending on people's needs. And I suppose we need to equip people with the tools and the skills to be able to look after themselves, but also organisations have a responsibility too. And it's not just down to HR. I think senior leaders need to be buying into this as well. I think HR are seen as the leaders for the wellbeing things, but actually business leaders also need to be, championing this as well, and not leaving it to HR to hold the fort with it, because it's a senior management leadership round the table piece that needs to be addressed from all angles.
Definitely, I agree. And so clearly I think HR perhaps have been adept over the last sort of 3 to 5 years at reacting to mental health issues, perhaps case by case, as best they can, and handling it. But there's very much a feeling out there now that organisations need, in the same way that they need a diversity and inclusion focus, there's very much this health and wellbeing focus. And what are we doing perhaps more proactively? What happens before someone puts their hand up? Now, obviously, you're training mental health first aiders, which isn't yet obligatory, am I right? You don't?
No, it's not obligatory yet. I think there will be a change in law, maybe in the next year or two, potentially. That's my view. Others might think I'm completely wrong, but I think eventually we will see that. And we know in schools, the law is changing, that there is going to have to be a mental wellbeing lead in all schools, and it has to be a role on its own. So right. That's quite interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in workplace in the next, couple of years or so. But you're right, it's not mandatory at this stage.
Understood. So I'm assuming that's a good example of one thing. Many great organisations have already done it. Others are probably thinking about doing it if they haven't already. Some may not be there yet, and may well wait until it's mandatory, should that come. Are there any other, across this year, any other organisations that you've seen are doing some great proactive work to try and help support the employee base? Is there anything you've seen that you've thought, oh, we've helped them do that, or what a great idea, I'd like to share that with other businesses?
Yeah, so I've joined a few different kind of workshops and webinars over the course of this year, and I think mental health first aiders form a small part of, wellbeing strategies for organisations. And there's been a lot around, the culture, shifting the culture, actually making it a safe place to talk about mental health issues. Because yes, you can introduce mental health first aiders to an organisation. Anyone could do that. But if there's generally a feeling of, it doesn't feel safe to actually raise it anyway, even if we do have mental health first aiders, actually there's no point investing in mental health first aiders, and it shouldn't be that tick box exercise. So there's a lot around culture, senior leaders sharing stories of, issues that they may have experienced in relation to their mental health or general adversity, overcoming barriers and actually being okay to share that story. But more and more so around, how do we build resilience in the workplace? There are various apps that are available out there now as well that can capture data around, well, how is the organisation feeling? And we can track that on a daily basis if people are willing just to take that 2 seconds to say, actually, I'm feeling happy, or I'm not feeling so good today, or I'm feeling somewhere in the middle. So there is, these data-driven apps that can really support organisations to move forward. And, where are we not doing so well? How can we make some change and take action? And that's the most important thing. I think it's all very well gathering all this knowledge, but actually if we're not taking action on it, then there's no point in really doing it. But yes, there's lots around culture, different workshops, financial wellbeing workshops, physical wellbeing. So thinking about wellbeing from a holistic point of view and not just focusing on one aspect, but much more around, resilience workshops and really trying to embed all of these things into policies, practices, values, and all those kind of good things.
Excellent. No, well, very good point. And a lot of, as you say, values particularly. I think I imagine a lot of businesses are tweaking their values and mission statements this year to reflect, what's happened to the world this year, really, which is a good thing, isn't it? I know my organisation has.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
So one thing I wanted to mention, just because I sort of noticed it recently. So I think we were just talking. Yesterday was International Men's Day, which I was unaware of until just before the day, if I'm honest, ironically. Hot on the heels of International Stress Awareness Day, I think previous couple of weeks we had National Menopause Day. Mm-hmm. What impact do you think these events have? Do they work?
So it's a really great question. I think having awareness days is fantastic because it does raise awareness. It gives people an opportunity to get involved, be enthusiastic, maybe learn something, have conversations, and take action. And again, I've just mentioned the action piece. So it's great to have them. I also think it's good to be talking about this stuff all of the time. There's something like, I think, 200 awareness days every year. So it might be tricky to be having conversations about all of this stuff all the time, but I do like the focal point that it presents. I think in some cases it's like, right, we've had this awareness day and now we move on. So I don't really know what the true impact is of having those awareness days, but I think it's better than being completely silent on so many of these different topics about physical health, mental health, culture and ethnicity, neurodiversity, identity, the list goes on. So it is good to do it. I do think and wonder about how much action is actually being taken around those awareness days by different people, by organisations. So yeah, I don't really know if that answers your question, but I think they're a good thing to do. It's just the action piece, I think.
Well, even they're known as awareness days, aren't you? And you're quite right. Perhaps even if they were badged as action day, and we, maybe there'll come a line in the sand where we stop doing awareness and start doing action. And that's where I think we can galvanise champions within organisations to do a lot more in that space, I suppose. But I hadn't realised there were so many. I mean, there's only 165 more, and that's it. There's one every day.
Yeah, pretty much.
Frightening. Right.
I think there's about 200 women. I read that somewhere anyway. Someone, again, I might be completely wrong, but I'm sure I read that somewhere.
I'm sure you're right. So it would be wrong to tackle this subject without talking about another really big change for people this year, which is the working from home piece. We both are at the moment, I assume, from our own, our own abodes. It's become the default for an awful lot of people. Have you seen, what effects have you seen as a result of this in your wellbeing work this year?
Okay, so again, I think it really comes down to different individuals. Some people have really thrived. People I've spoken to have never felt better working remotely. And psychologically, I've also said to people this year, we aren't working from home. We're trying to work through a pandemic. And I think psychologically that's slightly different because, if we're trying to work through a pandemic, actually we can be kind to ourselves when we have a bit of a bad day rather than we're just generally working from home. But like I've already mentioned, people are in very different situations. So, some people have never felt more productive, getting loads done, fewer interruptions. We know that some people are also overworking too. Some people have never felt busier, and we're starting to see those lines blur between work and home life. And of course, there are concerns about people burning out as well. I'm hearing more and more people working, into their evenings, into their family time and downtime. And in the longer term, of course, that's a huge concern. But of course, other people have struggled with it. Other people have really missed that social interaction of the workplace, and those feelings of isolation have become very, very tricky. I think for people living in really busy households, trying to juggle multiple responsibilities, that's been a really difficult experience. And we know people live in busy households who might not be in a family setting, but it might be a shared house. And actually, their only workspace is their bedroom. So again, you're seeing those blurred lines between, what's my workspace and what's my home space? Actually, it's all in one room, essentially. And that can be tiring. People can feel, alone and isolated again if they're kind of stuck in their room all day. I think from a work perspective, we are certainly, accustomed to having that social interaction on a day-to-day basis, whether that's at our desks, in the kitchen making a cup of tea, in the lift, or just passing each other in the corridor. We are used to having that human and social connection. And it's vital for our well-being. So with that lack of social connection, we are more likely to experience feelings of anxiety and depression. And actually there's a piece of research, I can't remember where I read it, that actually that social disconnection can be more harmful to our well-being than smoking, high blood pressure, and obesity. So that's a bit of a worry.
Yeah, no, it's a worry, isn't it? And I'm not surprised. I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk about the introvert versus the extrovert and how they've dealt with it. And as you say, some people have thrived, some people have really struggled. Personally, I seem to have good days and bad days. I have days when I get nothing done from home and days where it feels like a week's worth of work done from home. So I think the hybrid seems to be the future, doesn't it, for everyone's productivity and well-being, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you say that, because naturally I'm an introvert. So I build my energy from that peace and quiet. But if I'm at home all day and I have no calls in the diary, by the end of the day, I feel absolutely exhausted. And actually I start to feel low because I feel like, I've not actually spoken to anyone all day. I've not had that social interaction or connection with anyone. And so I kind of think, then I need to proactively maybe call a friend or call a family member just to have that. Because even though I need that peace and quiet, that social connection is a must. We need that for our well-being.
Definitely. No, I completely agree with you. It's funny. There are people I've spoken to recently where I've become aware I am just talking at them because I've missed humans.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, staying with that point, I suppose there's a number of businesses. I think Twitter were one. I think Facebook have been quite quick to announce either a never going back to the office or we're not going back to 2022 or something like that. What are your thoughts? Is that wise, bearing in mind what we've just said?
Yeah, is it wise? I mean, it's a great question. And, part of me wonders if these decisions are being made based on what employees want and what has been communicated. Have they taken action and done some surveys and have said, what is your preference? Would you rather wait until we have a bit more certainty rather than being back and forth in and out of the office? And if the results of that is, well, actually, I'd rather be at home, then yes. If the decision is just being made blanket, then we know, of course, that based on what we just talked about, people have struggled with working remotely, permanently, without any kind of end in sight. Of course, there are cost perspectives associated with that. If people are working remotely, then there aren't those benefits. But I'm aware of people this year who have had to go into the office for their mental health. They've had to have had that connection, even if it's with 4 other people in the office, and you might be 10 meters apart from one another, but they've really needed that bit of connection, that change of scene from the 4 walls. And I think flexibility is probably the way forward. What people need, a mix of both things, or not at all. We know that working remotely, people feel that they can achieve a much more of a balance. So particularly around, I've got 2 hours commute into the office and 2 hours home. Actually, people working remotely, well, that's 4 hours in my day that I'm saving. And actually, alongside that, with those commutes and coming home late, less feelings of guilt if it's eating into time with the children as well. So there are those benefits and reducing stress. And it's the same with lunch times. If we're in the office, do we rush out to try and get a sandwich and we're in the queue, and then we spend most of our lunch break actually, not resting and not relaxing? So I think, there are advantages of people working remotely, but of course there are disadvantages too, for those who need that structure of going to the office at a certain time and being strict with leaving the office. That lack of human connection as well, we know, is detrimental to people's health. And I think generally there's a concern also that particularly for people who are kind of new into their careers, not hearing those at the desk conversations or in the kitchen conversations, where actually you do tend to learn quite a lot. And when you're working remotely, you're kind of missing out on all of that stuff. So where people start to feel that actually they're a little bit behind in their learning, they might start to, in the longer term, feel like, oh, I'm much further behind in my career and I'm always going to be playing catch up. So of course that can cause an element of stress as well. So and I think there's a whole big piece about relationships as well. We know that this year people have joined organisations remotely and have been onboarded remotely. And, if people are finding it difficult to relate and understand their new colleagues, then again, in the longer term, that can cause some kind of stress reaction or anxiety. So never going back to the office ever, I don't feel it's that wise. And I think a balance is needed.
No, I'm with you. I agree. I mean, as you say, some of these decisions, you wonder how much consultation took place. Do you know what I mean? They seem to be quite quick and sweeping statements, and they may not well be right for everyone, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just I think that consultation piece is really important. And I understand the intent behind it too, that actually we need some stability maybe before we start bringing people back and then saying, oh, actually, no, the office is closed again. But I think those conversations are super important.
Definitely. I mean, staying with that and maybe taking you back to your more HR profession, I suppose. One of the things I wanted to ask was around performance as well. And this came from a conversation I was having with an HR director about their business. But how do you think performance may have been affected by this very extended period of remote working?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are potentially running out of steam, and how does performance productivity look for this year? Again, I think it depends on the person. So some people have absolutely thrived. I think if people are strict enough to take regular breaks and not exhaust themselves out by the end of the day, then actually productivity and performance can be maintained, of course. If people feel that they're actually out of touch with their team and disconnected, you might see changes in team performance. You might see that dip a bit. You might find people finding it hard to really focus on activities and chunk their time when they're working remotely, so that might impact their performance. And particularly if it's a task that you don't really want to do, you might find it easy to be distracted by, oh, I'm just going to take the dog for a walk instead. Because we can do that, we do have that flexibility. And also, if the home environment isn't ideal for working, if people are having to do their work in their bedrooms, actually, we might see performance dipping there as well. And I think there has been a huge challenge around having authentic conversations. It's much more difficult to communicate with people. Yes, we have all this technology, but actually nothing beats walking up to someone's desk and saying, do you have 5 minutes? Rather than it feeling like a bit of an effort of, well, let me check their diary. Are they actually free if I do give them a call? So it has been more difficult to have those conversations, one-to-ones, those regular welfare check-ins as well. And I think line managers have had a huge responsibility to try and proactively communicate with their teams as much as possible. And there have naturally been concerns, generally speaking, conversations I have had with different people working in organisations, that there has been concerns about people's performance, and okay, well, we need to get these people back into the office because they're not performing. Well, actually, just because they're present in the office doesn't mean it's going to improve their performance. Maybe we need to be having more conversations around it, and maybe being in the office would help someone's performance. But there's also been this kind of trust piece where those organisations who haven't been as far ahead in their thinking around flexible working and working from home, lots of trust around, well, if they work from home, are they really going to be working? So that's been quite interesting to see. But I think there will have been different impacts on performance for different people. And I think it depends. It's always that, it depends. It's always that kind of answer. It depends on the individual, how they found it. I think what's been key is having those conversations, being able to coach people through, be supportive, understand, and compassionate as well. I think compassion's been really key.
I think you're right. Again, it's that proactivity of encouraging that dialogue rather than waiting for someone to need the dialogue, isn't it? Which I think is a common thread. It was this question came out of a conversation I had with someone who, they work for a very well-known human capital consultancy in London. Obviously, I can't name them, but they said that some of their clients had expressed concerns as the year had gone on as to the capability of some of the consultants working with them, because they had been so siloed and weren't working as part of a team. They weren't as connected. They weren't bouncing off each other and challenging each other, that the level of innovation had dropped. And I thought that was, alarming, obviously, and really interesting, that if you take a bunch of people who are very, very intelligent and are going into organizations and dismantling them, unpacking them and rebuilding them in a far more efficient way, and then you completely change their way of interacting without warning for the best part of a year, it probably does have a very unintended knock-on to their capability, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. And that piece around innovation and creativity, you're probably going to make further bounds ahead with that team bouncing those ideas off, and where you can't have that in a meeting room, for example, it probably is going to absolutely impact those outputs, that performance. Yes, that's really interesting.
I thought so. It's not so focused in the wellbeing space. It was more a performance piece, but it really made me think that, that whole thing about muscle memory. What have I stopped being great at that I don't even realise? Do you know what I mean? And it's only when I remember the sudden change when we went back to the office at Alexander Lloyd in, I don't know, July, August time, after this long break. And how easily I was irritated by interruptions. And I was always great at multitasking and all that. And then people were asking me questions and I couldn't bear the noise. And it's where I'd been left alone for so long. And you have to, I think, regrow that tolerance. Maybe I'm just a grumpy old man, I don't know.
No, it's definitely not that, Simon. Definitely not that. But you're right. People's communication skills might change when you're working remotely versus in the office, and interpersonal skills as well can of course change. And yeah, just those social skills, just generally, if you've been working remotely for 9 months and then all of a sudden you're faced with your peers and your line managers and your directors, that you have that professionalism required in that face-to-face setting, and you need to start tapping back into those skills and almost relearning them in a way.
Definitely. And of course dressing smartly from the waist downwards as well, which none of us have done for months.
And I'm not going to lie, I've got my slippers on right now.
You and me both. We'll do a slipper show at the end, maybe. So anyway, changes in thinking, I suppose. This was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. What changes in thinking have you witnessed in your role as an external consultant as people have navigated their way through the pandemic? Are there any, again, common threads there?
I think the biggest change and the most common thread has been people thinking around what's really important to me. And I think people have been able to take that time to reflect on where they're at, what they want to do going forward, and that's whether they're working or not. So they might be working in a marketing role, or it might actually be, I've recently been made redundant and I'm just having a rethink about, do I really want to be going into a similar role, or can I just take some time to think about that? And I've had a number of people reach out to me through LinkedIn this year saying to me, I'm really interested in getting into the health and wellbeing space. Do you have any advice for me? Do you have any kind of top tips? And some of those people have been made redundant this year, and others are working in a role that they've been working in for a few years. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things, lots of key reflections, I think, for people about what really matters. And also how we've taken so many things for granted in the past, like seeing family and friends. And I think going forward, where we've had that, physical distance from one another, I hate this terminology, social distance, we're still trying to be socially in touch with one another. Let's call it physical distancing. I think going forward, I do wonder, where we've been inclined to say no to getting together with people, actually we might see a lot more, yes, I'm going to take that opportunity, because, for so many months, we've not been able to do that. So I think that's probably one of the key changes around people's thinking in terms of what really matters to me and what I want to do going forward. Learning a huge amount about ourselves as well. Some people have found it actually quite eye-opening and found it easier to live with themselves. I know people who have lived by themselves for a really long time, but actually this year, I think there's been kind of like, oh, well, actually other people have had to deal with living on their own too, and I feel better equipped to do that now. And for others, actually, it's been the most challenging period in their lives as well. And I think as the year's gone on, I don't really want to get into politics, but I think it feels like there's been a bigger divide now, more than ever, around people's thinking of how this whole thing's been dealt with, masks or no masks, and all these arguments and this polarity that we're seeing. So whilst it's kind of like we need more compassion and kindness, and everyone's got these different belief systems, actually we're also seeing huge amounts of polarity of, what about the people with, cancer and the suicide rates, but then what about stopping the spread of it and you have to wear your mask? So yeah, I think that's a big shame, because it almost feels like people are going against each other, and we really need to be coming together, I think, more than anything. And general changes in thinking about, looking after our personal well-being, essentially being forced actually to look after ourselves more and be mindful of our mental well-being. And I think for organisations too, thinking around flexibility, understanding one another's circumstances, and then, yeah, just trying to show that kindness and compassion again, as I've already said. Those are probably the key things that I've picked up on.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest there, and you're right, as you say, in some ways this year it's brought so many people together. I remember the weekly applause for the NHS and all these things. There were some really wonderful moments, but yeah, of late, it almost feels a little bit Brexity again, doesn't it? You're seeing people, even today I think they've announced And again, we won't get too political, but sort of this pay freeze piece for people in the public sector, and depending on where you sit on so many points of view, that it's going to raise so many questions. It's a difficult time. It seems a lot harder this end of the year in the bad weather than it did at the other end of the year. You know, I think people are struggling.
Yeah, agreed.
Generationally, this was something that came out of a conversation I had with someone, and we were all talking about how many people perhaps meet their other halves at work. I met my wife at work, and there's a whole generation of people where that maybe it's already changed. Do you know what I mean? But certainly people are going to be potentially going to the office a lot less often, or never if you work for Twitter. What do you think have been the effects on different generations during the pandemic and their mental health and wellbeing?
So I think it's a really great question, quite a tricky question actually. We know that research has been conducted all year this year, from before lockdown and at regular intervals during the year. And that generally is showing that younger people, so 18 to 35-year-olds, have struggled much more with feelings of loneliness, isolation and general hopelessness than those in the kind of 40 plus age groups. You know, I kind of wonder what that's down to. I do wonder if it's down to, you know, people in 40 plus age groups may have dealt with adversity, difficult life circumstances, so actually may feel more equipped with the tools and skills to find that resilience. Whereas for younger people, you know, 18 to 20-year-olds, actually this is a huge adverse period and it might be the biggest thing that they've ever dealt with. So actually they may not have those resources yet to deal with it. So I do wonder if that has something to do with it. I also think for people newer into work, again, might be having difficulty with navigating joining organisations, particularly if it's a first job. You know, there's been many more reports in that social disconnection, I think, those feelings of isolation in younger people. And again, generally, you know, what is the impact for me longer term? You know, I do feel further behind in my learning because I haven't been able to speak to Bob at the photocopier as I would usually. And even for those who haven't been able to get jobs this year as well, people who might be new out of college or university and have been trying to get jobs all year, again, having that gap, automatically they might be feeling a bit hopeless because, well, that's it, you know, a year of work that I've missed out on, a year of experience, you know, financial impacts as well. So I think for younger people, it's been really, really challenging. And, you know, I could delve into schooling as well and the challenges that young people have faced with, you know, school, that sense of isolation. If they have held part-time jobs, those kind of disappearing when the shops closed too. I think for maybe millennials, of course, there's concerns financially for everyone, but again, we might find that millennials still feel like they're catching up from the 2008 issue. So actually now it's kind of like, great, we've got another challenge 12 years later. Again, financially, those impacts are very real. And, you know, they've had their children too, so they're probably worrying about their children and the impacts of this year on their children. And I guess maybe for older generations, I'm thinking about, you know, retirement age. People might have decided to retire earlier, just might have sped up that process in terms of, you know, deciding to leave work early, or for others, actually, it's pushed it out because of financial circumstances mean that they need to work a bit longer. And there's part of me that thinks maybe we are going to be seeing more people going self-employed with the realisation of, well, what is important to me and, you know, how do I want to contribute? But also maybe more opportunities to freelance and consult if organisations aren't actually taking on full-time employed staff as well. So I don't know if that answers your generational question, but those are kind of my thoughts and my thinking around how it might have impacted different people. But I think the younger people, for sure, you know, that's what the research is pointing us to, that there's a much higher sense of isolation, hopelessness and loneliness. And even where people have been socially connected online, actually it's the in-person stuff that really counts for younger people too.
I agree. And I mean, you always relate it to your own experience, don't you? But I I can remember being young, and how much fun it was. Seems a long time ago, but when you're working and you've got that set of work friends, if you like, and how fantastic that was. And it really saddens me to see, you know, the number of people that seem to have had much harder struggles during lockdown 1 and 2, where, as you say, if they're young, they're potentially more of them living on their own in their own place without garden space, you know, without even a balcony to look out and get some fresh air, and just being cooped up alone is really, really tough, you know, at a time when I suppose you like to feel you're most social. I don't know, although again, I think part of me thinks I've always tried to keep my own generation quite, I think we're still quite cool, really, and that we're still going out and doing festivals and all these kind of things. And you know, but we all miss that. I was talking to my friends recently, you know, we're as big avid music lovers and going to concerts and festivals, it's gonna, I can't see when that's going to come back at the moment. And that was my social life, you know. It's challenging for so many people in different ways. So no one's got away with it, have they? So moving forward on that positive note, recommendations to the HR profession for 2021. If you know, in your role as consultant in the mental health and wellbeing space, what would you suggest HR professionals need to be thinking about now and planning for as they look towards a more positive and successful 2021?
Okay, so I feel like I've been a bit doom and gloom. I'm really sorry. So for going forward, call me naughty, but I will say that HR professionals also need to be looking after themselves. This year, HR have had an amazing opportunity to shine and really partner with the business, but there has been a lot of demand. Keeping up with legislation, the lay of that land has been ever changing, and spending that energy and time on, okay, what's the announcement today? What's happening tomorrow? How does that change? What's the communication look like for people in the business? You know, delivering on projects, delivering on change programs, you know, answering numerous difficult questions and navigating through it all whilst, you know, doing the day job. So for me, call me naughty, call me biased, but first and foremost, HR need to be looking after themselves. That's the first thing.
Very true.
Going forward, 2021, keep talking to your people on a regular basis to understand the lay of the land with how your employees are feeling, and from that being able to take action. So if you've got that data, if you've got those insights, you know, where are we doing well? Okay, that's great, we can maintain that. Okay, what's not looking so good? Okay, maybe we need to take some action and make some changes around that. Continuing to get that senior leadership buy-in for those wellbeing initiatives, and looking proactively at different wellbeing programs. I think it's the proactive piece that so often is missed out on. And I'm sure a lot of people have read that Deloitte report that was released in 2020 this year. And, you know, the return on investments on proactively looking after people's mental health and how fantastic it can be for the bottom line. So thinking about the physical side, the mental side, the social side, and the financial side, because we know they're also intrinsically linked. And if we experience, you know, issues with our social health, then we're likely to see impacts with mental health. So looking at it from a holistic point of view, and we know that financial wellbeing is a massive concern for people now and going forward. So, you know, there are various workshops and, you know, free advice services that can be offered. Technology maybe as well, looking at different options for technology. Again, it's going to require investment, which I know for some organisations is difficult to do, but there are apps that make, you know, wellbeing programs really easy to access for employees. You know, we all have technology, we all have phones, so making that, you know, as accessible as possible. And yeah, for me, it's around the communication and the support networks where people are feeling understood and listened to. You know, that reduces anxiety in itself and you know, any kind of negative emotions. So I'd say that. And yeah, the piece around flexibility as well, and choice and how we work. What does that look like? Is it a blend and a mix of, you know, being at home, being in the office as well, in a nutshell?
I think you've covered everything. I mean, there's, as you say, there's a very long list of things to change as a result of what's happened this year, aren't there? And on top of the BAU and all the restructures they were already doing and all this stuff. So I agree. HR and technology particularly, I think, have raised their profile in an unplanned but very successful way this year.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Sally, thank you so much for your time. It's been really lovely to catch up with you after a little while. And I'm delighted to see what you're doing, get a lot, see a lot of people looking at it on LinkedIn. It's quite high profile, and I'm, really keen to support your journey there. So obviously, if people want to reach out and make contact, is best way through LinkedIn in terms of finding you, Sally?
Yes, probably LinkedIn. Definitely.
Excellent.
My preferred
channel.
My preferred tool, yeah, for sure.
So obviously, anyone interested in hearing more from Sally, please feel free to reach out to her on LinkedIn. And I will keep in touch with you, obviously, and look forward to hearing how the rest of Q4 goes, and catch up with you in the near future. But thanks a lot for your time, Sally Desborough. Great to see you.
Thanks. Take care.